The International Monetary Fund is a global institution that promotes economic growth and stability around the world by offering its member nations technical assistance, financial support, and policy recommendations. There are 190 member countries. The IMF collects massive amounts of data on national economies, international trade, and the global economy in aggregate, and provides economic forecasts. One of the IMF's most important functions is to make loans to countries that are experiencing economic distress to prevent or mitigate financial crises. The IMF origin. The IMF was originally created in 1945 as part of the Bretton Woods Agreement. The goal was to encourage international financial cooperation by introducing a system of convertible currencies at fixed exchange rates. The dollar was redeemable for gold at $35 an ounce at the time. When the dollar decoupled with gold, the IMF allowed the market forces to determine the value of currencies relative to one another. This system remains in place today. IMF's objectives. The IMF has several objectives. It is a gatekeeper. Countries were not eligible for membership in the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, or IBRD, a World Bank forerunner that the Bretton Woods Agreement created in order to fund the reconstruction of Europe after World War II, unless they were members of the IMF. Of course, if any country wants to be a member of the IMF, they must abide by agreements and rules. Global auditor. The IMF collects data on national economies, international trade, and the global economy. They analyze the economic growth or lack thereof of countries, regions, and the world. They publish these findings and forecasts in the World Economic Outlook. They are accompanied by lengthy discussions on the effects of fiscal, monetary, and trade policies on growth prospects and financial stability. The goal is to guide investors, policymakers, governments, and the international community on what they should do to nurture economic growth. Capacity building. The IMF provides technical assistance, training, and policy advice to member countries. Training includes data collection and analysis. Any data collected as a result of training is added into the IMF's project of monitoring national and global economies. Lending. The IMF lends money to countries that are experiencing economic challenges to prevent or mitigate financial crises. Where do they get the money that they lend? From member countries. Like any loans, a country that needs assistance needs to make reforms approved by the IMF to increase their growth potential and financial stability. Of course, the institution is not free of criticism. Many believe that the loan is a way for the IMF and the biggest contributors to control other countries. Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz, in his 2002 book, Globalization and Its Discontents, claimed that the IMF is to blame for failed development policies implemented in some of the world's poorest countries. For example, in the Asian crisis of 1997, many countries such as Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand were required by the IMF to pursue tight monetary policy and tight fiscal policy to reduce the budget deficit and strengthen exchange rates. However, these policies caused a minor slowdown to turn into a serious recession with very high levels of unemployment. Indonesia was one of the worst cases. The IMF offered Indonesia $43 billion, demanded the closure of 16 privately owned banks, and required that interest rates be raised. The closure of the 16 banks triggered a run on other banks. Indonesians panicked, and it forced the central bank to provide large credits towards the remaining banks to avert a banking crisis. A second IMF agreement was drafted to include provisions of a social safety net designed to tackle Suharto's patronage system. This still failed, so a third agreement was signed. It was more flexible but still demanded privatization of state-owned companies and a new bankruptcy law and court to handle bankruptcy cases. But it took a fourth agreement before Indonesia started improving economically. Argentina is a popular one. In 2001, Argentina was forced into a similar policy of fiscal restraint. This led to a decline in investment in public services, which arguably damaged the economy. In the 90s, Argentina fixed the value of the peso at parity 1-to-1 with the US dollar. The IMF was against it and warned the Argentine authorities about the sustainability of the exchange rate regime. In December of 2001, when it became clear that the agreed program was no longer sustainable, the IMF refused to disperse a $1.24 billion tranche of its $21.6 billion loan. Argentina defaulted on its loan, the peso fell, the economy has gone into a free fall, people couldn't withdraw their money. Indonesia's real gross domestic product in the first quarter of 2002 was 15%. Unemployment has risen to 22% of the workforce. Do we need the IMF? We need a neutral global organization that can help other countries. If we want a prosperous economy, we need a prosperous market. But the IMF must learn when to come in and when it shouldn't. Many times it lends to countries that are beyond repair. The organization showed signs of learning from their mistakes when they let Greece default. But now that we are in the middle of a global crisis, the IMF has hardly done anything. They committed $1 trillion lending capacity, but have not done anything that could help us all to recover and prevent another pandemic. Many feel IMF has to evolve or be replaced.
Noble Gold Investments has a top reputation in the gold and precious metals IRA industry. From their exclusive secure storage in the state of Texas to their white glove service. Minimum investment for IRA is only $20,000, and low markups on the metals make Noble Gold a very attractive option. Visit the link below the video or noblegoldinfo.com or call 1-626-684-4908 to speak to someone and get your free investing guide and more information right away. Don't wait. Do it now.